Proposing an amendment to the state budget that would give the Department of Corrections authority to release offenders who have 1 year or less left in their sentences.
As the coronavirus spreads, Governor Ralph Northam wants to create more space inside Virginia's prisons. But he says an early release should only be available to a certain type of inmate.
They must have demonstrated good behavior and not be a threat to public safety,
which some say calls into question a recent decision made by the state parole board.
Mike ran out of chances on November 13th, 1979, laying in a pool of his own blood with 5 gunshot wounds to his face and head.
In a case unrelated to the COVID-19 pandemic, the board voted 4-1 to release a man who murdered a young Richmond police officer some 40 years ago.
We have 5 people, 4 of whom said the life of a police officer is not worth a hell of a lot.
Vincent Lamont Martin shot and killed patrolman Michael Connors on November 13th, 1979. Martin and a group of accomplices had just robbed a 7-Eleven store in the city's Monroe Ward neighborhood and were driving the wrong way down Madison Street when Connors pulled them over. Investigators say Martin first shot the officer in the neck, then stood over him and fired several more shots into his head.
It was just a flat-out execution. And the medical examiner testified that in the course of the autopsy, she removed bits of gravel and stone from the left side of the officer's face where he had been hit on the impact of the bullets forced his head down on the ground.
Both Connors and the gunman were just 23 years old. At the time of the killing, Martin already had a long record of violent crimes.
What has Vincent Martin done in the last 40 years to show that he is a responsible individual to go back into society?
Stacey Garrett was one of the prosecutors during the trial.
Some things you just never forget.
Martin was found guilty of capital murder and given the death penalty, but he later appealed that ruling and was ultimately sentenced to life in prison. Connors' family and several current and former Richmond police officers tell CBS 6 that news of Martin's parole has left them stunned.
It was disappointing and devastating when we heard it on Good Friday, of all days, but it was almost something we expected.
We did some digging and found a document that seems to cast doubt on whether Martin is fit to be released. When he went before the board in January of 2019, he was denied parole. The board gave several reasons, including Martin's extensive criminal record, his history of violence, and the serious nature of his crimes. The document concludes with this quote, "Your prior failures and/or convictions while under community supervision indicate that you are unlikely to comply with the conditions of release." So if the board felt that way just 1 year ago, why is the 64-year-old Martin being released now? On the parole board's website, there is a statement from Chairman Adrian Bennett that says, "We have spent years researching this case and reviewing the facts and stand firmly behind our decision to grant his release. We strongly encourage any member of the law enforcement or criminal justice community who has concerns about this decision to conduct a similarly thorough and unbiased review of this case. We are confident that after doing so, others will reach the same conclusion."
This has been a parole board that has not been afraid of making tough decisions.
We asked Virginia's Public Safety Secretary Brian Moran about the board's decision.
Clearly, the pain and anguish is being relived all over again 40 years later. And so our hearts go out to the family, the Richmond Police Department, those who knew him. This was unfortunate, but a decision that the parole board stands by.
As for Officer Michael Connors' family and friends, they say they're hoping that someone intervenes and prevents Martin from being released. They say a life sentence barely fits the crime, and if he walks free, they feel like they're being victimized all over again.
Mike's mom and dad, who are both still living, and his sisters have to go home to is this: a shadow box with his badge and his Medal of Valor and a gravesite, and that's it. He didn't get to have a wife and kids and probably by now grandkids. And he got his brains blown out by somebody that was on his 4th try.
Family and friends tell me they are in a letter-writing campaign to the governor's office and Commonwealth's attorney begging them to rescind the state parole board's decision. However, Secretary Moran says there's not much more that can be done. Deputy Commonwealth Attorney in Richmond, Leonard Berry, wrote in a note to Maureen Clements, the sister of Michael Connor, that this is the worst miscarriage of justice he's seen in 40 years. Working for you tonight, John Burkett, CBS 6 News.